Did you know backing collisions involving emergency vehicles are one of the most common types of incidents in our industry? It's true. We'll tell you what you need to know to reduce the risk of injury and property damage caused by poor backing practices right now. Try to find the common element in the following two stories. Story number 1. An emergency responder from New Jersey was run over when he was spotting for an apparatus at the scene of an incident. Just before the tragedy, the driver of the engine had eye contact with the spotter in the officer's side mirror. Then, while backing, the driver was momentarily distracted by another moving vehicle in front of him, and he looked away. That was all it took. A moment. Story number 2. A Pennsylvania man was killed when an emergency vehicle ran over him as it was being backed into the station. At the time, the victim was behind the vehicle taking pictures. The driver was not using a spotter and could only see what was in his side mirrors. He never saw the victim and another bystander behind the vehicle. What do these two stories have in common? In both cases, the drivers did not have a complete visual picture of the area around their vehicles, yet they continued backing. In Story 1, the driver lost visual contact with his spotter. In Story 2, the driver had no idea what was behind his heavy apparatus. As a result, 2 people lost their lives. Now, I know these are extreme examples. Not every incident will result in a fatality. In fact, most times, backing incidents cause damage to vehicles or property, and that's not good either. So maybe you're thinking, how hard can this be? Our company hasn't had any problems with backing vehicles. Well, maybe not, but all it takes is one time. Just one time with a distracted driver or spotter. One time where safe backing practices aren't used. Are you ready for that one time? In this video, we're going to describe what a safe backing program looks like and why it's important to have best practice SOPs and SOGs in place that are followed and enforced. Next, we'll get into the responsibilities both drivers and spotters have in a backing situation. We'll focus on the critical importance of visual and verbal communication between drivers and spotters. That's what was missing in our first story. And finally, we'll show you situational factors where you could have backing problems. All right, let's roll. The best practices we describe in this video will apply to all types of vehicles used in emergency services. Each type of vehicle has unique features, so you need training and practice to understand how to operate the ones in your emergency fleet in a backing situation. As with other elements of your driver training program, your safe backing program starts with developing clearly defined SOPs and SOGs. VFIS's Emergency Vehicle Driver Training Manual offers a list, but these guidelines need to be tailored to the vehicles in your organization. So, what should be included? Well, first, the hazards of backing. Backing an emergency vehicle is dangerous to begin with. There are a lot of blind spots that interfere with the driver's ability to see hazards, like fixed objects, parked vehicles, trees, poles, overhead obstructions, or equipment taken off the back of the emergency vehicle and placed on the ground. There are also moving hazards, like pedestrians, children, or other emergency workers. You may have never thought about this, but the blind spot to the rear of your emergency vehicle can extend more than 100 feet, depending on the length of your vehicle. That leaves a lot of room for error. However, we're going to cover several ways for you to reduce the risk created by this blind spot. Next, and this is really important, the safest thing you can do is to avoid having to back up at all. When pulling up to an incident, drivers should always consider placing their vehicles in a way in which they can pull away later. Not having to back up is generally the safest option. Next SOG, identify the responsibilities for both drivers and spotters in a backing situation. These individuals need to know their specific responsibilities and how to communicate with each other. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Also important, your safe backing SOGs must include training evolutions for both drivers and non-driving personnel, or spotters. Specific training evolutions for backing are essential for drivers because, number one, they need to know each vehicle's handling characteristics so they can back up in any situation. And number two, because they need to know how to work with a spotter. Spotters need to be part of the training evolution because they have to know how to effectively communicate with the driver. and they need to know how to position themselves to stay safe. Here's an SOG you may not have thought about. You have to include enforcement procedures and disciplinary actions if an emergency worker fails to follow the established backing practices. Only then will drivers and spotters understand just how important safe backing is. Okay, let's move on to your backing training program. Drivers and spotters both should be trained in 3 areas. Number 1, hand signals. We'll go over these in detail later, but you should also review them in VFIS's Driver Training Manual.